Welcome to Coffee with Phil. I'm your host, Phil Strong, and welcome to this new season, this new series called Let Your Light Shine. This series is based on the words of Jesus that we find in Matthew chapter 5. He says, "Let your light shine before all men." In this season, I'm going to tell stories about how I've used my life, my passion to serve others, to demonstrate the light of Jesus in many, many different ways. It's a story-based season, and I hope you get on board to understand how you can let your light shine. Well, hi and welcome to the podcast. Welcome to my studio. Good afternoon and welcome to you. It's late in the day for me today, much later than I normally record. But I've been out and about, drinking coffee with friends, swapping stories, encouraging one another. It was a leaders gathering today, and I was glad to be there. I was glad to be invited, glad to catch up with people from all over the country. And, one of the things that's really important is doing life in a community, doing life surrounded by people who see you, who know you, who love you, and who are willing to walk with you. And you've heard me say this many times, but one of the things I value the most is having friends that don't try and fix me every single time they see me. And look, I've been on a bit of a journey around that lately, and well, I won't dive into that rabbit hole now because we've got a different focus. This is a series, as you've heard, called Let Your Light Shine, and I want to speak about that today in this topic, episode of Coffee with Phil. Where's the number? Number 129, episode 129, and the title of today's episode is Pathways to Jesus. I'm going to tell you some stories today about creating pathways to Jesus. But before we get into that, of course, we've got to talk coffee. I was having my breakfast this morning and I looked at the hopper on the coffee grinder and I noticed that it was getting a little low. Kathy was making noises like she wanted me to make her a coffee. And so to prepare for that and for the rest of the week, I spent the breakfast moment of my day roasting coffee, and it was absolutely delightful to have the aroma of the coffee beans roasting in the kitchen. It's just a delightful sensation to have. I then had a good coffee, of course, got myself ready for the day, headed up to the meeting, walked in, and how blessed was I to hear those wonderful words. Would you like a coffee and would you like your usual? You know, that's like you're seen, you're known, you're valued. And of course, when I received my piccolo latte, which is my order in that location, it was delightful and I was appreciative of it. Yeah, it's the little things, you know. Years ago when I started making coffee, it was at a church, and a big church, busy church. They had 2 services in the morning, 2 gatherings, and in between those 2 gatherings, we would make coffees for everyone, and we make a lot of coffees. And one of the things that I found challenging in a good way was to try and remember what people's order was. So, for instance, there was a lady called Gail. She ordered a coffee, but she always wanted to put some cold milk in it to cool it down. Or, if you know someone that has a flat white, but they have it very, very flat, so that's like almost minimal foam on the top. That's a flat white. The pastor, Sheridan, he always had his long black, but short long black, so only half full of water. Remembering those things about people and honouring them in that way is my way of saying, look, I see you, I know you, and I value you. I just wish I was as good at remembering people's names as I am as remembering their coffee orders. Or their kids' names, or it's good to have a community where we're seen, we're known, and we're valued and we're loved. So find yourself one of those, and I'm grateful to have those in my life. In this season, Let Your Light Shine, we've anchored ourselves in the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, which is Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. Jesus shares many, many wonderful things with us, one of which is this short passage where he says that we're the light of the world and we're salt of our community. And it's really powerful. I want you to maybe spend some time thinking and praying into that. And what I'm doing in this season, in this podcast series, is really just telling stories. But what I want to do is I want to read it to you. So I just went to Bible Gateway and Matthew 5, verse 16, and I said, let's look at all the English translations. And there is one in there, I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called the Voice translation. And it's remarkable to read. And I am not promoting it as a word-for-word approved translation. I am saying to you that it's quite wonderful to read because it's written like a play. It's a contemporary translation. It's done by the Ecclesia Bible Society, so whether that means anything to anybody, but it's called the Voice Bible, and it is in Bible Gateway, which means at least they appreciate it. But listen to this. This is the Voice translation of Matthew 5:16. You, Jesus says, are like that illuminating light. Let your light shine everywhere you go, that you may illumine creation, so men and women everywhere may see your good actions, may see creation at its fullest, may see your devotion to me, and may turn and praise your Father in heaven because of it. That's an interesting translation. It's expounded a little bit. It's added to. It's like the Amplified that fills things out to attempt to help us novices to understand more of the intent of the author. What I love about this is I just want to highlight something here is that phrase that said that people, men and women, they see your good deeds, may see creation at its fullest, may see your devotion to me and may turn and praise your Father. This idea that they would see the creation of God at its fullest through you. And I was recently writing something and just saying to people, it was for the local paper actually, I was saying, trying to write a faith column for people who aren't of faith. And so I don't usually use direct explicit quotes, but I reference the Bible and its wisdom. And I said, the Bible teaches us that God has created us, each one unique, but as a masterpiece. And the idea is that God has this unique inspiration for you, for me, for every single person that is born in the image of God, which would be all of humanity, and that each one is a unique creation, as unique as a thumbprint, that it expresses, each one of us, each one of those creations expresses the majesty of God in a unique way. Fancy that. You are to let your light shine, that your uniqueness and the majesty of the masterpiece that God created you to be, that's Ephesians 2 verse 10, would allow others to see creation at its fullest and an expression of your devotion to God. This is fascinating. What I want to do is I want to quote to you 3 different quotes that are attributed to, some would say questionably, but there's a man called Eric Liddell, who was a Scottish missionary who was really blessed in the way that he could run and run fast. And the movie that was made, my gosh, I'm guessing 84, in the 1980s, a long time ago now, called Chariots of Fire, tells the story. And so some of the quotes that are attributed to Eric Liddell are actually movie quotes. So let me just give you 3 quotes that are attributed to him, which may have been through the movie and it may have been through his own writing, because as a missionary he wrote much of his faith, his Christian faith. The story of the movie, without spoiling it, he was a specialist in running the 100 meters, but because the race was to be held on a Sunday, he said that because of his faith and his desire to honor God by honoring the Sabbath, he would not run on the Sunday. Therefore, he chose to run in the 400 meters and excelled, let me just say it that way without spoiling the story, the 1924 Paris Olympics. Let me give you this quote. I believe God made me for a purpose, Eric says, and he also made me fast. When I run, I feel his pleasure. This is who we aspire to be. Sons and daughters of God, created by God in the image of God, unique in the design of God, in order that we would reflect him through the way we live our lives. It's the whole purpose of this season, friends, that I would encourage you, as I encourage myself, to let my light shine before all men, that they would see my good deeds, see my expression of whom God made me to be, and that ultimately they would glorify God in heaven. Let me speak to you about the pathways to Jesus. Because when we think as a church about how we might demonstrate our lives of faith to other people, in a church context, we might call that evangelism. And when we talk about evangelism, people shrink back. They say, well, I'm not an evangelist. I don't have the confidence or the training or the skills or the anointing or the grace or the gift to be an evangelist. But each one is designed by God, uniquely representing God in order that we would demonstrate God, which means we're all evangelists in some way. So we would often, in our church team meetings, sit around and talk about how we could express ourselves in the love of God for the people that didn't yet know God. Now, that's evangelism. We would take an approach where we would consider what we learned to call felt needs. I believe I've spoken about the book City of God many times on this, but that's my gosh, what's his name? Pastor Alan, somebody from somewhere in Canada. He speaks about felt needs in his city, in his town. And so we would look at the community around us and we would say, where's people's pain? Where's their suffering? Where's their need? How can we serve them? And so we would talk about this because we would find that blatantly and publicly expressing God loves you, turn your life to him, you sinner, it wasn't really getting great traction. And in fact, it was probably driving people away from Jesus instead of helping them move towards him. And as the great teacher Shane Willard said to us once in a teaching session, he said, sometimes the best thing someone can do to help people find Jesus is stop talking. So those people that are turning people away from Christ are not helping the mission. So we designed a kind of evangelism, I suppose you would say, that speaks slowly. And we likened it to the story of the Good Samaritan, which you can read about in Luke chapter 10. When Jesus was asked, how should I love my neighbor? He told the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I'll let you go and read that for yourself. But evangelism is a demonstration of love that speaks slowly. So there was a bunch of women in a team in our church that were running a program called Shine Girl. And it was a program that they were very passionate about because it helped young girls, pre-teen, I'm talking, 9 through 12, 13, that they would help these young girls to understand their unique beauty, the value that they had, and that they would grow in self-awareness and self-confidence and the ability to carry themselves into womanhood. And now this was clearly not something I was passionate about, but I was passionate that they were passionate. So my job was to help them in that passion. And we'd sit round and they'd say, well, look, we've got a unique opportunity because this program allows us to go into schools. But the public schools will not allow us to speak about Jesus. That's just the way our country is right now. And so we sat down and we said, well, what if there was a pathway to Jesus that began with a workshop, and that we can take the program which is brilliantly created to help these young girls to understand that they're beautifully and wonderfully made, uniquely created as divine inspiration, that they are special, that they are loved, they're cherished, that they have purpose, that they have skills and talents, and that they can contribute to the world. Let us build them up with that language. Now, friends, if you've been around the church for more than 5 minutes, you'll know that all of that language is based on the Christian Bible. But there's many different ways that you can speak those messages without necessarily having to quote the scriptures. So these women would go into the schools and they would run these workshops for 8 to 10 weeks. And they would just love these girls. They would run the program with the approval of the school, within the boundaries of the permissions that the school had given them to respect and honour the hosts. And they would build relationship with these girls and would run the program with these girls. And it was getting fantastic feedback. It really was. And then we said, well, what would be the next step on the pathway to Jesus? Well, one of the ways that this program is designed to celebrate the girls is to have a celebration dinner at the conclusion of the 10-week program. And so we sat down and said, how could we do this in a way that allows us to demonstrate love in a practical way? And so what we did is we dressed up, we, meaning not me, them, dressed up our church facility as like a restaurant. And we got rid of all the pews and we made it look pretty and we put out white tablecloths and we put out special place settings and special cutlery and glasses and some of the women are exceptionally talented at dressing the table to make it look beautiful. And the girls were invited to a special dinner, celebration dinner, that they would be celebrated. And they were told, please invite one special person to be your guest at the celebration dinner. And it can be anyone you choose that you want to bring to celebrate who you are. And so they would choose. Sometimes they'd choose mum, sometimes they'd choose dad, sometimes they'd choose grandma or granddad, sometimes they'd choose their auntie or their uncle or a special family friend. But they would come and they would dress up in their special dress-up clothes, whatever, a girl dresses up in, and whether they wear makeup or jewelry and fancy shoes, but they would feel $1 million and they would come into the building and we would welcome them into the building. We would take photos, special photos that they could take home to remember their special night, and we'd invite them in and they would be seated at these beautifully dressed tables, and we would serve them a 3-course meal. And so what we would do is we would arrange that the meal would be prepared by someone that was really good at doing that sort of thing. So a chef or a catering company or someone that just loved to prepare meals. And you know what I got? I got the guys in the church to dress up, like fancy dress up, as waiters to serve. And they would set the tables, they would serve the tables, they would clear the tables. If we were having a buffet, they would deliver the food at the buffet. They would top up the drinks. They would do the dishes. They were there to serve. And during that evening, I would be the main host as the church leader and someone that would speak a blessing over these girls, and every single one of the girls that graduated in the program would be invited onto the stage and they'd be applauded and celebrated and given a certificate and a special gift. And then several of the girls would have been invited to share a testimony, so they would speak of the confidence and the growth and the gratitude that they have, and then I would close the evening by saying a prayer of blessing over each girl and their families. Man, I can tell you, when the girls were presented the gifts and they shared the testimonies, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. And we would invite the school principals to this dinner. We invited the mayor's wife to these dinners. So, of course, she brings old mate along, her husband as a +1, and the mayor is sitting there with tears in his eyes as he sees these 10 or 11-year-old girls sharing testimonies about how they've realized just how special they are. And we would offer these dinners free as part of the program. Why? Because as a church, we wanted to have people in our community that come along to be made to feel special with no conditions attached, no strings attached. We would just say, hey, we're the church that's part of the community that wants to love you. And that's another step in the process. But then the women who ran the program, they said, what if we did an after-school program or a holiday program where we could take a little bit more liberty to invite the girls along, but to run a program that helps them to discover their unique identity in Jesus Christ? Well, that's another step in the pathway to Jesus. And then they said, what if some of those girls were invited to a youth group event where perhaps there was music and a preacher and a presentation of the gospel where they could choose if they would respond? That's a pathway to Jesus, right? So my point I'm making is that we would seek to serve the community and provide a pathway that allowed people to take steps toward Jesus over a period of time, like an evangelism that speaks slowly. These are what we call pathways to Jesus. A second example, again, both of these are church examples I'm choosing to use today. The second example is a counselling in schools program that still runs today, many years after it was piloted, long after I've left. But the goal of this was to make professional counselling available to young people in schools who are struggling. We had where this came from, this was not my idea, but we had a teacher, a primary school teacher in our church, and one day she rang and she said, look, I wonder if after school you could come and bring a team and pray in my classroom. We said, well, we'd love to. Why would you want us to do that? And she said, today I had a young boy threaten to hang himself with an extension cord in front of his classmates, and it's caused a lot of grief and anxiety. And I really would love for prayer that the peace of Jesus and his Holy Spirit would be in my classroom. Of course, we were happy to do that. What it uncovered was the exposure of an extent of anxiety in primary schools that was shocking. We undertook a survey. We surveyed 20 local schools. There was 3,500 children. And of those 3,500 children, 304 children were referred for counselling, for anxiety, for anger, for grief. They'd suffered a loss of a parent, or a parent who had gone to prison, or perhaps they'd been witnesses to some kind of domestic abuse, or perhaps they'd been recipients of domestic abuse. And so we were, what do we do about this? Well, out of the blue, this woman rings me. She says, hi, I'm a trained counsellor. I've been working with schools in a different city, but now we've retired here. Is there any way that I could be involved in what you're doing in the schools? We just felt God opened the door. So over a period of, I think, the 7 years that I was involved in running the program, we opened doors into 19 schools. And those school principals were valuing, they said, we just value the church for wanting to be an active part of our family, our school family, our community, that you care enough to come and to provide for free to these families at your cost professional counselling for the children. Again, what's my point? Is that we would say, hey, we're the church, we're part of the community. We see an area of pain, a felt need that you have, and we want to offer that. We want to have an evangelism that speaks slowly, that speaks about the love of God through the actions of the church. And so you might call that social evangelism. Now, I will put a little flag in here, like a note, and that is that, you know, my friend really challenged me on this one day. We were speaking about it. He said, don't ever deny the importance of sharing the gospel message. And it really resonated with me, and it challenged me, because we don't want to do good and have no eternal outcomes. So our ambition in having this kind of evangelism that speaks slowly is that we would be practically demonstrating God's love through the way that we serve the community. And in that, we build trust so that when they're ready, to come closer to Jesus, one step at a time, that we're there and that we're a trusted partner in that journey. I said to you, I was with leaders today and had pleasure of walking back from lunch with a friend of mine who is an old guy like me. In fact, he's an older guy, and he's still playing rugby for the Presley's grade. So this is old men running around in mud playing rugby. And he said, when I started out, they knew me as Pastor Simon, but I didn't want them to call me Pastor Simon. So I play rugby with them. I sit with them as we sing songs after the rugby game, and I look out for them. And I've been doing this for 12 years. I think I can't remember the exact number of years, but he's been doing it a long time. He says, but do you know what? Now they accept me as Pastor Simon, and when it's appropriate, they're willing for me to pray a karakia, or prayer of blessing, over our rugby team. Why is that? Because he's been with them in a way that they can discover that he is safe, he is good, he is kind, he is loving, that he cares for them, and that he wants to introduce them to the same love that he experiences through God. Friends, this is how we find a pathway to Jesus that we can lead others through. I'll bring you back to Eric Liddell as we look to close this episode. Eric Liddell, the runner, he says this also, well, again, attributed to him. Many of us are missing something in life because we're after the second best. He was a man that spoke openly of his faith at a time when all kinds of hate was going on in the world. This was in between the First and Second World Wars. He was an Olympic athlete, but there was all kinds of hate around blacks and whites and Nazis, and yet he would speak boldly with his faith and use his gift as a runner to create a platform that invited people on a pathway to discover Jesus. Many are missing something in life because we're after the second best. And I think what I would say to you is don't set your life up to be chasing after second best when there are people all around you that need to find a pathway to Jesus. Years and years and years ago, I remember a young woman in our church sharing about evangelism, and she said something that I still remember, like 20 years later. She said, for many people, their journey to discover Jesus doesn't begin at the same place yours does. If we imagine a train heading to heaven, there are many bus stops or train stops along the way. You may have got on the train much earlier, but be confident, she says. There are many stations, there are many stops, and there are many opportunities for others to find their pathway to Jesus. Man, that encourages me. All we've got to be doing is making the invitation. Friends, it's not about us convincing people, arguing them into heaven. It's about us presenting Jesus through our lives in order that they may see him. May they see your good deeds. May they see the representation of who Christ is through your life. And may they glorify God in heaven. The third and final quote that I want to bring you from Eric Liddell is this: you will know as much of God, and only as much of God, as you are willing to put into practice. Friends, faith is an action word. To be a follower of Jesus means going where he goes and doing what he does. And today, I just want to challenge you in this episode that creating pathways to Jesus is one way that we can partner with him to help others to discover the same love that has transformed our lives. I want to close this by saying to you that I'm praying for you, that you would let your light shine, that you would find ways to demonstrate God's love through practical means to people who may have never have experienced it, who may never set foot inside a church, who may never read the Bible. But through your life, they will read of, see, and experience a demonstration of the love of Christ that he has for them. May you go well. May you go in his strength and grace. and may you always point people to the love of God our Father. God bless you, friends. I look forward to being with you next time on this series, Let Your Light Shine. What's the heading of the next one? Affecting Families with Love. That's going to be interesting. I wonder how that will go. All right, I'll see you then. Take care. Bye-bye.